Welcome to the fourth branch program, the place for common sense. Today is Saturday, July 27, 2019. I am MD. As usual, on Saturdays, we have very heated conversation about some form of topic that controversial. Today is no different. We will be talking about war on blacks. What war on blacks, you might ask? In 60 seconds, we will tell you the answer. Thank you for staying with us. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very special program. Today is Saturday, meaning controversial. If you joined us before, thank you. You make the journey a little bit lighter, a tad more bearable. If you join us for the first time, once again, welcome. The fourth branch program is not associated with any political party. And we at the fourth branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to perfect union. And in order to do so, we ought to remove the biggest obstacle of all: ignorance. JFK said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Thus, the importance of eradicating ignorance from our society. This particular topic, war on blacks, was introduced as part of our program in order to discuss race relation in America. This is a complex topic. It is a controversial topic. In fact, the very title of the program, title of the program, War on Blacks, has already caused a lot of individuals to question the very purpose of the program. What war on blacks, they ask. Now, if you've been watching this program or you watch previous tapes, episode, you may have already had the answer to that question. But if you join us for the first time, this program was started with discussing the race relation in America, and we went as far back as the period of slavery in order to not only establish a base, but also provide a context as to what exactly we mean by war on blacks, but most importantly, by providing elements of such war. Now, when you hear the word war, it means fight, it means casualties, right? Because that's what you expect when there is a war. Even if you've never been involved in wars, but you've seen it on TV, you watch war movies, or you even witness live the United States of America engaging in war with other nations. And you know that it is inevitable in war, there are going to be casualties. So when we mention war on blacks, we don't mention it for the sake of mentioning it. We mention it because we have been providing here on the forefront examples, plenty of such, of casualties that blacks have suffered. Now, the aspect of this discussion we want to approach today comes to light because of something that just happened pretty much a week or so ago. But in order to set the stage, in order to provide a great deal of understanding, we are going to take a look at historical data to provide and move the conversation forward. Now, most people today like to talk about war on blacks using a different expression, a different word. We call it racism. Well, but it's not the same definition of war, right? Of course not. But maybe racism is a misnomer when we talk about what really is going on, what really happens to blacks. Again, if you've been watching this program, and I encourage you really to visit the People Branch YouTube channel and take a look at past video of this particular topic. You can search for war on blacks, you can search for race relation, you can search for racism, and any of those words or expression will bring forth the video, the past video that we have produced based on this particular topic. And we think that the expression war on blacks is more fitting. But for the sake of addressing to the major part of the conversation, we're going to use the word racism to discuss what we have today. Now, the discussion of racism in America is not anything new and is not anything that was introduced by the current administration. Of course, for the past couple of years, the country has spent most of its time really lambasting, bashing, pointing out racism of the individual in the Oval Office. Now, it is already disturbing that the first person whose primary job is to try to remove those aspects of problem in our society is the individual that's actually inciting it, that's antagonizing people, that's provoking people, and making the situation much, much worse. But for sake of our discussion here, we ought to remind you that Donald Trump is not responsible for the state of racism in the country. He contributes to it, and for the past 2 years, he has exacerbated the situation. But we cannot, no matter how much we stretch his outrageousness, we cannot put that problem on him. Now, it is a topic that we could say we can live with, or we simply ignore it and hoping that at some point in history that people would become understanding, would become knowledgeable about, the different other people who are different from them, and hoping that suddenly everything will fall into place. We could have, but history also tells us that those kind of things never get resolved on their own. But there is another most important reason why we decide that we ought to talk about it, we ought to discuss it, to debate it until it is resolved, is because it is very costly to society, it is painful to upcoming generations, and interestingly enough, it tears society apart. There is nothing good. According to history, there has never been anything good that comes out of racism. A couple of days ago, I discussed here the cost, and it's a heavy cost to society of racism, and I'm referring to World War II. Yes, World War II. Adolf Hitler believed that the German race was the purest race on the face of this planet. As such, it was justifiable for Germany to conquer the world, to rule over everyone. Racism is very costly. Here in America, we have seen the damages that racism has done to most, but exclusively to blacks. And whenever we talk about damages and whenever we talk about racism, it sounds almost as if it's a philosophical discussion. There is not much to it. And that's the reason some people, they just shrug it off because it's not of any concern of theirs. Some even justify it by saying, I'm not racist, so it doesn't concern me when there is a conversation about racism. And those who practice racism, some are usually in a category where they do it in a very subtle way. Others, such as the white nationalists, the KKK, they pretty open about the whole thing. They put it in display. In fact, they think that it's so good that they can do marches and tell people, please join us. We're practicing racism. Now, if we take the example of what happened in Charlotte, you remember Charlottesville in Virginia, when Heather Heyer was killed by a white nationalist who took a car and rammed it into the crowd. Heather died and 19 other people were injured. Remember that? I want you to keep that in mind. This is not the purpose of the conversation, but I want you to keep in mind that picture of racism. As I just mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, there has never been anything recorded in history that shows anything good, anything positive about racism. In fact, throughout history, the only thing we have had as far as racism is concerned is damages to our society. That was a very recent example of such, where one individual who opposed racism, who opposed white nationalism, got killed and 19 others got injured. With that picture in mind, consider the following. Now, remember I just mentioned to you that different categories of people, of racists. Now, you have those white nationalists who openly saying that we are racist and we are proud of it. They're marching for that. Usually people march to prove, to either go against something that's bad or to support an individual for something that the person is doing that approved by the majority. But those people, the white nationalists, their march was to say racism is just fine. But as I always mention here in this program, my biggest concern is not the white nationalists who openly say we are racist. Not that it's okay, but it at least helps identify those who are causing harm to our society. But we know, we are certain, we are 100% certain those are a very small percentage of the people who are racist in the United States of America. How can we possibly know that? Now, I must make an important statement before I tackle that question that I just asked. Here on the Fourth Branch program, we do not discuss topics, issues, just for the sake of discussing them. As I mentioned at the top of the program, and you probably will see that or an announcement and so on, the purpose of this program is to perfect the union. And there are plenty of obstacles that prevent that from happening. And one such is racism. So we do not discuss topic the same way that those topics may be discussed elsewhere, not just for the sake of having a conversation and move on. Now, how can we possibly know that the white nationalists, the KKK, are not the only racists in the country? Now, unless we want to take everyone who practice racism as members of white nationalists or KKK or any other white privilege type of groups or organization, no matter where you go in this country, if you are black, you will encounter racism, prejudice, bias. At the workplace, it is not novel for anyone to know that blacks are passed for promotion. Blacks are not even more qualified than white, would be passed over for a job. Blacks are usually the first to go when there is layoff, when there are problems, financial problem at the organization. On the street, whites are targeted. On the in the courtroom, whites are punished more harshly. The list goes on and on and on. Even in the hospital, where the individual being treated also with insurance will pay the same amount of money as the white counterpart, the doctors, the nurses treat those blacks differently. So yes, racism, prejudice, discrimination is not an affair of the white nationalists or the white supremacists. It is widespread across our nation. And as I mentioned here before, in order to solve a problem, it has to be acknowledged. Pretending that it doesn't exist, pretending that it's just a small group of people, is one of the major obstacles to solving the problem of racism in the United States. You're not going to talk to anyone and ask that individual, are you racist, for the individual to say, yes, of course I'm racist. Well, if the person is not a white nationalist, because those people will tell you without batting an eye that they are. But those small groups aside, most people would shun the idea of being called racist. Of course, I'm not racist. I love black people. In fact, I have family members who are dating black people. My sister, my cousin, actually married to a black person. Give you all kind of example as to why they think they're not racist. And yet, in the mid of the 21st century, racism is widespread and rampant in America. Now, I remember since 2013 when I started to publish articles to show, to provide examples of how racist the country is in particular, but the Republican Party in general. I got a number of people who think, well, that's your opinion, but it's not really that bad. In fact, even blacks believe that things have improved so much that we should be dancing on our head. I always believe that's baloney. Today, we will present to you, we will discuss a couple of historical elements of racism, how devastating that is to our society, and we will take a current example of how damaging racism continue, how much damage racism continue to inflict in our society in general, in the black community in particular. But the biggest part of the problem is the fact that those who are not racist, well, a number of those who are not racist, white that is, continue to ignore the problem, continue to think that's not their problem since they're not racist. And I'm going to prove to you that you cannot ignore a problem that's causing damage to our society just because it doesn't concern you directly. Because the damages to you, to your family, to future generation, your children probably could be devastating. As such, we cannot simply ignore a problem just because we are not directly involved or concerned. Racism is the biggest damage to our society, and it has been. You may recall during our discussion of slavery, we mentioned that there were two groups of whites in the country, two categories. There were those who were blatantly racist and condone, approve, nurture racism. They were the ones who actually were adamant about keeping slavery around. And on the other side, there were the whites who were disgusted by the practice, who hated it, who believed it was inhuman, and who fought to end it. Now, whenever the discussion about racism comes up, as I mentioned earlier, it's not almost like a philosophical discussion, and it's boring. I don't have time for that. Besides, you might say, I'm not racist, so I'll let somebody else listen to that. With an example of what has happened because of racism, actually examples of what has happened because of racism is coming up. Live from New York City at the top of the hour, every weekday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The Fourth Branch presents discussions, debates, commentaries on social, political issues, current events, sports, entertainment, religion, education, science, and every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. for a full presentation on controversial issues such as abortion, homosexuality, war on blacks. Are Republicans dumber than Democrats? Information which might irritate you, make you cry, make you laugh, but above all, will make you smarter. Join us every time it is the right thing to do. It is the only way to keep your sanity in a world of chaos, hypocrisy, immorality, and deception. Welcome to Common Sense. As I mentioned earlier, the notion of racism is always used and understood in a context that sounds more philosophical. But for blacks, racism is not philosophical. Blacks live, experience racism in a way that makes it impossible to live a happy life just like the whites. Scrutinized for everything that is done. If you've been watching this program, you are certainly aware that, for instance, in New York, cops would stop a black person, a black teenager, walking down the street 4 or 5 times more frequently than they would a white counterpart. That is detrimental, excuse me, to black society. During my time in journalism school, I remember very clearly there was a discussion about crime in the country. And one woman, a white individual, said there is so much crime in the country because blacks commit a lot of crimes. And of course the discussion gets to detail and examples were provided over and over and over. And I realized that that's exactly the mindset of whites who are ignorant of what really is going on. They simply hear, but they do not have time to understand the detail behind what is really has been going on for blacks in black community. Here's an example, some I use in order to provide to the class and to that particular individual an understanding of what's been going on in black community. Before Obama left the Oval Office, there were, according to record, at least 35 or 3,600 blacks in jail for non-violent crime. But those people were called criminal. But here is the kicker. Those non-violent crimes had to do with an individual, usually teenage boy, in possession of a small packet of drug, whatever that is, marijuana, that for personal consumption. But according to, well, the legal, the rule, the law, considered possession of a whatever, however small pack of drug a crime. As such, all those people were thrown in jail and labeled criminal. And most of them were black and Hispanic. Now, anyone who is logical, who wants to help society, would see that as an injustice, not as a way to bash, not as a way to label, not as a way to stigmatize, because the quote justice system has been very unjust towards blacks. And it was said that way not just yesterday. Every time we discuss the end of slavery and the beyond the Civil War, we always bring that forth to explain as to why that is. It's a conversation that we did not just end, because the conversation cannot possibly end at that point. So I had to explain that when in New York, for instance, you have two individuals, a black and a white, walking down the street. Each one of them usually would have a small pack of drug, marijuana, whatever it is, in his pocket. The black will be stopped, the white would not. But the white does have a small pack of marijuana in his pocket too. But the black was stopped, not the white. As such, the black was arrested for drug possession. You get the picture? Thrown in jail, and usually not even going through the due process, would spend 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years in jail, not even seen a judge. And those people will be lost in the system. We call them criminal. You see the problem? But again, that's not even the reason that I brought this topic in today. But it's important to understand that our government has been responsible for racism, for discrimination in the country. And by our government, we mean the legislators, congressmen, senator, people, the Department of Justice. They all been in on it. And it is not something that's done by accident. We will return to the beyond the Civil War in order to walk you through that process that our government has established, and it continues up to today. But let me provide to you the grim reality of racism in America. It is not just a word, at least not for blacks. It is a state that we black cringe at, because we know the danger of racism wherever we go. Yes, white people do not understand that, because they think, oh, everything seems to be okay, because, well, if you're a white person walking down the street, and every time that you walk by a police, they just smile at you, but they stop the black, there is no problem for you. The question is, why would they stop the black and not the white? The answer is very simple. It's because the system said it that way. The police officer is just an agent of the government, in that case the Department of Justice, who is doing the job for which he or she is tasked to do. Stop blacks, not white. Because if white were being stopped at the same rate as black, there would have been an uproar, there would have been protests. But what stigmatizes black even worse is, if every time you stop a black individual, but the white never gets stopped, and you stop the individual and you find a individual pack of drug for personal consumption, so it becomes second nature to say that it's pretty obvious that if you stop a black, you're going to make an arrest, because it's a crime. And all those teenagers, their lives being destroyed by the system, the future completely destroyed, because they never get to finish high school, they never get to go to college, they never get to become a good citizen for the country, because the system is set in such a way to destroy blacks' lives. When I say war on blacks, this is not just for sensationalism. This is a fact that blacks have been waged war on since the onset. From slavery to today, it continues. As I mentioned, I'm going to read to you a grim aspect of racism in the country that happened in the past, and I'm going to present to you a number of examples in modern time in order for you to get an understanding as to how devastating racism is to blacks. And why it is important for those who are not racist, white that is, not to shrug it off or ignore it because, well, again, you might say, well, I'm not racist. Let's take a look at history, shall we? Let's meet Emmett Till. That name you may have heard it. You may have even seen the picture. You may have a vague idea as to that young boy. He was murdered when he was only 14 years old. In fact, his name came in the news a couple of days ago because one monument dedicated to his name is now being replaced with a bulletproof monument, and the reason should be obvious to you if you're paying attention. Emmett Till was murdered, but I want to describe to you how he was murdered, because whenever a conversation about how racism exposes the savagery of white racists, we always think that it's something of the past, and I'm going to prove to you that that's not the case. Whites who are racist, that's why blacks are right to be concerned about racism, because it's not just about showing bias or prejudice towards black. It is dangerous because every so often whites do things that get some people to think it's a bunch of savage, they're worse than animals. But that's not even the worst part of the conversation, and I'll explain in just a moment. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we as a society be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Abraham Joshua Eshel explains, racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason. Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Whenever there is a conversation about blacks, when it comes in the news that a black has committed a crime, the language used by white to describe that is always mind-boggling to me, as to, in order to get it gives you a window into their soul as to what they feel, how they feel about blacks. And yet, when there are mass shooting, massacres by, so far, whites, well, there were a couple of blacks, but in general, by whites, the conversation is different. You don't hear any white labeling the criminal, the mass murderer, of being savage, not fit for society, not any of that. Interestingly enough, that's an observation that I never could grasp as to why that can be. A criminal is a criminal, and if you feel a certain way about criminal, then it should be that. But that brings us again to, even in matters of crime, whites who are racist always prove, even when discussing crime for crime, that they show their racism. Now he's, in a sense, whites, and we're not talking about teenagers, we're talking about grown-up people who committed the most heinous crime on a 14-year-old boy. But I'll tell you even the worst part in just a moment. Emmett Till. Emmett Till was born in Chicago in 1941. Well, if you look at his obituary, he said that he died in 1955, August 28, 1955. But to me, that was not properly recorded in his obituary. He was murdered in 1955. But listen to how he was murdered. Now, here's the gist of it. Emmett Till was visiting family in Mississippi. He is from Chicago. And according to the report, a lady by the name of Caroline Bryant, that lady, accused Emmett Till of flirting with her. Now, I want you to listen very closely. Caroline Bryant accused Emmett Till of flirting with her. She was behind the counter of a grocery store, and Emmett went and bought something. Now, whatever she said, that's all we have, because Emmett Till was murdered. And she said that Emmett Till was trying to, quote, pick her up, grab her from behind the counter. When her husband, she was married, when her husband came back from a trip, according to the story, he and her brother, the husband that is, and her husband, Caroline husband, and her husband brother went to confront Emmett. They ordered him to remove his clothes. They beat him to death. They gouged his eye out. They shot him in the head several times. They tied his body with barbed wire and threw him into the river. That was Tallahatchie River. Now I want you to listen to that carefully. A married man, which means we're not talking about a kid, a teenager who didn't know what he was doing. His wife say that boy, 14 years old, was flirting with her. He got his brother, and I think there was another individual involved as well, and went to confront a 14-year-old boy who could have been his son for the age. They beat him to death. They gouged out his eye. They shot him in the head, and they tied his body with barbed wire and threw it into the river. So when we talk about racism, this is not a philosophical discussion. We're talking about individuals who act like the most savage animals towards blacks. But the worst part of it all, of everything that I just mentioned to you, you think everything I just mentioned to you is bad enough? Do you know that weeks after this whole thing happened, this savagery by white racists didn't belong to the KKK, by the way. Neither the husband nor the brother were a member of the KKK. They were just racists. But do you know that 2 weeks after Emmett Till was buried, despite the pain the mother felt, she decided to have an open casket so that the world could see the savagery of white racists? His son Nono's body didn't have eyes because they removed the eyes. They gouged it out. They mutilated the body not because Emmett Till committed any crime, but because a woman said that he tried to flirt with her. Yes, that was his crime. He tried to flirt with the woman. But here's the worst part of the story. 2 weeks, there was a trial, and there were a few witnesses. Mosey Wright was one of such witnesses who could undoubtedly identify the defendant, which means those people who killed Emmett Till. There was no doubt, didn't have any problem, it didn't happen at night. After identifying the defendant, an all-white jury deliberated for less than an hour and found them not guilty. You see the problem with racism? You have three savages who destroy a human being in the most unimaginable ways, and you have a jury of 12 people, despite the fact a witness, well, actually there were several witnesses. Mosey Wright was friend to Emmett Till. They were together when that happened. Identified those savage white men who committed the murder, and the jury returned not guilty. So when we thought about the fact that those white men were racist and thought at least society would hold them accountable. No, that's not the way it works. The society, the white society in general, racist. So they came back, they said, not guilty. Now hold that thought. Do you know that Eric Garner was choked to death in New York City a couple of years ago? The same thing just happened. It's just a side note to give you an example that those things have not died. But of all that I just mentioned to you, do you know that today Carolyn Bryant wrote a book and published it a couple of years ago? That was in 2017. That is when she decided to speak out and say Emmett Till never said a single word to her. I'm not sure why she concocted that story. But after Emmett Till was brutally murdered by her husband and his brother, now she figured out it happened in 1955. So you know what? I'm close to death. I cannot go to my grave without confessing that the boy never did anything to me. You see, white people have been doing that for the longest. Carolyn Bryant is not an isolated case. The white society has been steadily accusing blacks of things they have not done. And if you've been watching this program, you've probably had plenty of examples of such that I gave you that had happened during slavery, beyond slavery, even in the 21st century. In 1741, and it doesn't happen just private citizen. Yes, a number of private citizens have done that too, because our government has set the stage for them. Has our government, elected officials, people in government, people who are supposed to pass laws, to enact, to implement policies, bring legislation that helps our society move forward. They are the one at the forefront of making certain that our society stays racist and continue to implement racism. Yes, our very government has been at the forefront, and it's still happening today. In 1995, lady by the name of Susan Smith donned her 2 kids. It's a black man that kidnapped my kids. In 1989, Charles Stewart in Massachusetts, killed his wife, murdered his wife, point blank, with a bullet in the back of the head, in a car, together, a pregnant wife, and pointed to a black man. In Florida in 1954, 4 black teenagers were arrested because they accused them of raping a white woman. They were nowhere near that individual. In New York, 1995, or was it 89? One of the other. 5 young black teenagers were arrested for beating to death a white woman and raping her, according to the story, except that it never happened. Donald Trump at that time took several full-page articles to demand the execution of those 5 black teenagers. They were never anywhere near that woman. Yes, society has been doing that, and it continues. And the reason is because it's easy for our society to simply put any blame of crimes on blacks. And our society continue to accept that as normal. No, it didn't just happen by accident. It didn't just start to happen. In 1741, a group of police officers made up witnesses and judges accused a group of blacks of plotting to do something bad. By the way, nothing had happened just yet. But the police and the police officers involved say that they got reliable sources, the witnesses that they concocted to tell the story, that says that those blacks are going to do something terrible. They routed all blacks, slave and free, and they executed them. That was in New York, 1741. Just recently in Baltimore, Maryland, a cop was doing something terrible and got caught, stopping blacks and planting drugs in their car and arrest them. We're not talking about 1741 anymore. We're talking about now, 2019. Now, of all the cases that I mentioned here, those people are not member of the white supremacist group. They're not member of the KKK. They are white. They are racist. And they know that it's okay to do those things because more likely than not, they will get away with it. In Chicago, a few years ago, Laquan body was riddled with bullets by a cop, point blank. Who claimed that he was running towards him in a very menacing fashion. For 2 years, case closed. Because, blacks running towards cop, threatening fashion, hey, that's okay. We believe that. Except that when the video surfaced, shows just the opposite happened, that the gentleman was actually walking away from the cop. In South Carolina, Michael Schlager, a cop who pulled his gun and shot the victim several times. When he radioed him, he gave this story that the guy was trying to fight him off. Except that when the video surfaced, the guy was running away from the cop. Yes, white have always accused blacks, and society have always taken their words as if this is true. And one thing I said here before, and I'll say it again, whenever you hear that a black is victim of a cop, the story by the cop is always false. That you can take to the bank. The only problem, sometimes there is no video to show it. Now, why do I tell you all that? And that those stories you'll hear again and again, because as we continue the discussion of how the society has been condoning white war on blacks, and war means casualty, and those examples are examples of casualties, and that's what a war is. Except that this time the war is one-sided. Whites have been killing blacks without any fear of punishment. Just like Emmett Till's murderers walk away not guilty, it continues on. It is not difficult at all for any white individual to accuse a black individual and for society to say, yes, we believe you, and for the justice system to act on that. It is a sad situation for our society, but it is even more devastating for blacks who continue to believe that there is progress, and white who continue to believe, well, racism is not really that widespread. Donald Trump ran for the presidency of the United States on the platform of racism. He is currently sitting in the Oval Office. Many have come to explain as to why that happened. They come up with all kind of reason. People were fed up. People wanted a change and all this crap. Donald Trump use racism as his platform, and he is sitting in the Oval Office, and he has never abated, he had never backed away from continuing exactly what put him in the Oval Office. So the idea that it was a different reason, yes, we can give ourselves all kind of reason for something that happened, but it is not science fiction, it is not rocket science to see that millions of white people, racists, rush to the poll to elect, to vote in a racist in office. And if you don't believe me, at least believe their words. A couple of weeks ago, they were interviewed, a few of them were interviewed, and they actually asked about that very question. Don't you feel concerned about the fact that the president of the United States is using racism? The answer? That's why we voted for him. And we said all that because we want to show you another casualty of racism in America in the midst of the 21st century. When we return. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we as a society be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel explains, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Lamar Johnson is a guy accused of killing Marcus Boyd, who is now spending life in prison without parole. But something eerily peculiar about Lamar Johnson's conviction, but for blacks, that's nothing new. Whites have always managed to accuse blacks, and sometimes it takes a while. The New York Central Park Five spent 2-3 decades in jail for a crime they didn't commit. According to a report that was filed by a detective, and pay close attention, when you have a justice system that's corrupt, and you have people who do not have the intelligence to see through that, then racism will continue to damage a number of people in a particular group. Lamar Johnson has been in jail for 24 years. According to the detective who investigated the crime that was committed, for which Lamar is spending his time in jail, a lifetime in jail. And listen carefully. At the trial, the detective explained that Lamar Johnson left his friend's apartment rather, traveled 3 miles to the victim, whose name is Marcus Boyd, front porch with one other man, killed the boy. He fled on foot and arrived back at the apartment to continue socializing with his friends in just 5 minutes. Now, if you had a good defense attorney, or if you had jury with brains, that theory should have been thrown out of the window right off the bat. You don't have to be a mathematician. You don't have to know how to run in order for you to see some very big flaws in that theory. But don't take my words for it. The current St. Louis DA finds that to win a murder conviction, both police and prosecutor made up evidence, and they also paid a witness. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Because it is. I just read to you or explained to you that in 1741 something similar to that happened. That was during slavery. Now we in the midst of the 21st century. Whenever I take the discussion about race relation, about racism in America, about wrongdoing towards black, some people always say, oh, that was in the past, nothing of this sort happened. And I just gave you example earlier that in Baltimore, a cop was doing exactly that. Those are not isolated examples. So Johnson Lamar has been in jail since 1994. But here's the kicker. It's not even his attorney that put that report out. Because if he were to be his defense attorney, he would say, well, that's what defense attorneys do, right? They try to defend their client. No, the current DA, because every now and then, and that's the problem with race relation, that's the difficulty with race relation in America. Because you have millions of whites who are racist, who are criminals, racists, who would want to inflict harm on blacks at any point in time. And then you have millions of other whites who are not racist, who are disgusted by racism, and who would fight and do everything possible to end racism in America. Just the big issue in our country, that we have the same face, white groups, races, plenty of them. That's why it's so difficult, because you cannot meet with a white and think that that person is racist, because there are millions of whites who are not racist. But the reason that the country there is widespread racism is because there are also millions of whites, not just the white supremacists or the white nationalists. Those are small group of people, but there is a majority of whites in the country racist. Donald Trump ran on racism, and he is the president of the United States. Yes, there are enough racists in the country to elect a racist in the Oval Office. Now, back to Johnson Lamar. Now, the current DA conducted investigation and found that even after 24 years behind bars, that Johnson Lamar was wrongly accused of a murder that he could not have possibly committed, if only at that time the people involved took the time to see that the evidence presented did not match. But it was a black. It didn't matter whether the evidence was there, because that's how society works. So Johnson Lamar, the DA found, was wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and the evidence presented could not pass muster, if only the defense attorney, and that's also another problem with blacks. They don't have any defense attorney that actually interested in defending them, because usually if they cannot afford an attorney of their own, the defense attorney would probably also would be a racist himself or herself, then they would not care. So Johnson managed to leave his friend's apartment, go for whatever reason, because so far, despite that fact that we heard that story, that there is no motive provided. But it didn't matter, because, well, it's a black. That's what they do. They kill people. So that's all the detective had to say. He managed to leave the friend's apartment, go to Marcus Boyd's front porch, and kill him. What did he get? Why did he kill Boyd? And he fled on foot, and he managed to run the 3 miles in less than 5 minutes, because it's not just going back, it's the whole thing that took just less than 5 minutes. But here's the kicker to show how black are treated in this country. In 1996, just 2 years after Lamar has been convicted of murder, they actually apprehended the actual murderer, who said unequivocally that Lamar was nowhere near the murder. He said, "I know he wasn't involved because I was there." We're talking about the individual who committed the murder. That's only 2 years later, but Lamar is still sitting in jail. So when we talk about the justice system in the United States, I'm not even even sure why blacks believe that there is going to be some justice done when a white does wrong by them. I always mention before, and I'll mention it again, the difference between the time of slavery and now, the white slave owners could kill blacks with impunity. There was no price to pay. Today, white police officers and others could do that without any fear of punishment. The only thing that changed is the perpetrator. It was the white slave owners. Today is the white police officer. That's the only thing that changed. I'm not sure if that's considered a progress in blacks' mind, but in my book, this is not progress. And when a police officer kills a black, usually unarmed black man, and walk away free, I'm not sure you call that progress. Is it because they do some sort of semblance of justice trial and then you call that progress? Society still condones a police officer of killing an unarmed individual and say it was okay. Now, our society is still saying it's okay for a police officer to kill an unarmed individual. Of course, they come up with all kind of reason. I was afraid for my life. I felt threatened. Whenever it's black, they felt threatened. And you have a white mass murderer with automatic weapon, but they do not feel threatened because, well, it's white. But unarmed blacks, gunned down, executed, they feel threatened, and society say, oh yes, I understand, you felt threatened. Now, it doesn't please white to simply hate blacks. They go out of their way to accuse them of things that they never did of wrongdoing, to stigmatize them, but even worse, the justice system is there to continue the work of punishing blacks even when they are innocent. Now, I must say Johnson Lamar is a very lucky guy because, yes, I'm certain it will take a few months or even years for him to get released. But at least he wasn't put to death. For a crime he did not commit. Emmett Till was murdered in the most heinous fashion, in the most savage fashion, for something he never did. And the murderers walk away free. That's what our society has been teaching, and now we have in the Oval Office an individual who is openly racist and who is saying to all the racists in the country, it's okay to show it off. Thus far, we have 14 people who have died in the hands of ICE. When Donald Trump said to the 4 women to go back home, the people who voted for him were asked, do you support the President of the United States being racist and continue to use racism? That's why we voted for him. Those people are not white nationalists. They're not white supremacy. They're just racist. And there are millions of those people. That's why they voted for Donald Trump. They're the one who said it with their own mouth. So you could say that that's not so. You're talking gibberish. You don't know what you're talking about. How about when you hear it from them? And Donald Trump never let. It's because he knows that there are enough racists in the country that would continue to support him. And so far, conversation we have had and interviews those people have given clearly show that yes, they don't care what anybody thinks. They are racist and they continue to be, and as long as it's possible, they want a racist to be in the Oval Office. As far as improving our society, that's not their concern. They are racist and they're proud of it. Just the other day, a day or so ago, a lady was caught on tape. Someone in her 50s, not a young individual, using racist language toward a few black women. And when confronted with that, she said she's not sorry and she will say it again. Yes, those are not white nationalists. They are just racists who are proud to be racist. Now, having a racist in the Oval Office, now they can come out and show off their racism as if it's a good thing to do. Yes, people, I said it before and I'll say it again. Most people in the Republican Party are racist. Now, they show it openly without any reserve because they figure that they have an individual in the Oval Office who is openly racist. So, why not? So a lot of people used to push back and tell me that this is not bad. It's not so. People are not like that. There are not that many Republican racists. I mean, I got an earful of those type of people pushing back about those things. Now, we see it firsthand. We're hearing it firsthand. Yes, most Republicans are racist. And the reason it's necessary to know that is because when you're trying to solve a problem, you need to know the roots of the problem. If you are concerned about racism in the country, this is a good place to start. That doesn't mean there are no racists in the Democrat Party. That's not what I'm saying here. We do have a systemic problem of racism in the United States. The reason this problem continues to be so widespread is because the rest of our society continue, those who are not, either are not racist or are indifferent, they continue to ignore it, and only when something happens they come and talk a little bit about it, as if that small talk, that small time that they spend talking about it should be enough and that should solve the problem. Obviously not. Because instead of the problem being solved, now we have a racist in the Oval Office that's spreading racism and that keeps saying that it's okay to be racist. And how did he get there? Because people who have the opportunity and the resources to help remove those type of plague, of disease in our society, they got into their cocoon and refused to speak up when they see evil, refused to put out the problem when they see it, and In their minds of, especially for people in the industry of journalism, they think being objective means not talk about something that's bad, not pointing out what's bad. That's not objectivism. That's not being objective. In fact, those who are silent contribute greatly to the disease, to the plague in our society. John Roberts said, the way to stop racism is to stop racism. It cannot happen when you stay silent. That cannot happen when you see wrongdoing and you turn your head the other way. It cannot happen when you see a legislator do things that pretty much exacerbate the situation and go along with it. It cannot happen when you see people in the law, Department of Justice, come with laws that clearly say it's racist and then you go along with it. It just cannot happen. Which means you are an accomplice. Racism is not a philosophical discussion. Racism cost is expensive, damages the society we live in, tears our society apart, and threaten future generations. Your grandfather, your father, your great uncle, those who come from a lineage of racist, slavery, ownership of slaves, may be okay with that. They may justify that. That's the time they live in. That's the time they continue to live in. In fact, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Act, those people were not happy. They were upset. Oh my God, we're not going to have any more slaves. Yes, that's the way they felt. Not that, oh my God, we were doing something so evil. Thank God for Abraham Lincoln. No, that wasn't their reaction. They felt Abraham Lincoln did them wrong. And as racists, you continue to carry their legacy. You continue to promote their legacy. You're not any different than those, than your lineage, than your ancestors who actually were slave owners. You may take comfort in the fact that there is no more slave, but your action, your behavior clearly say you know different, you know better. Slavery may be over, but your racism, continue to hurt the very country you claim to love. I hope this presentation was of some use to you. The information, well, helpful. If not, you already know what to do. Send us your comment, your criticism, your suggestion. Let us know how to do it better. As I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, this program is not going anywhere. So you might as well help make it better. In the meantime, if you should have a particular topic you would like us to talk about, let us know. We will research it, we will debate it right here on the Fourth Branch program, the place for common sense. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see you again Monday at 10:30 a.m. when we will continue the discussion on other important topics of our generation. I am MD. Good day. That was an update through the prism of common sense. Join us again next week. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, the place for common sense. Send us comments, criticism, suggestion, or simply let us know how we're doing. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. See you soon. The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.